The story you are about to hear is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. A mystery that has fascinated scholars, adventurers, and ordinary people for more than 4 centuries. It began with a dream of building England's first permanent colony in the New World. It ended with 115 men, women, and children vanishing without a trace. This is the complete story of the Lost Colony of Roanoke. In the late 1500s, England was hungry for exploration. Queen Elizabeth I wanted a foothold in the New World, a place where England could challenge the growing power of Spain. To make this dream possible, she granted a charter to an ambitious navigator named Sir Walter Raleigh. His mission was simple: establish a colony in North America. What followed changed American history forever. In 1584, the first English expedition reached the coast of what is now North Carolina. The explorers returned with stories of fertile land, friendly tribes, and endless possibilities. Encouraged by this, Raleigh sent a second group in 1585. This colony struggled almost immediately. They faced food shortages, storms, and tensions with local Native American tribes. Although they built a fort and survived for a time, they eventually abandoned the settlement and returned to England. But Raleigh did not give up. He wanted a successful colony, and he believed Roanoke Island was the key. In 1587, a new group of settlers set sail, led not by soldiers but by families. Among them were farmers, carpenters, and craftsmen. They brought hopes, dreams, and determination. This time, the expedition was commanded by John White, an artist and mapmaker who had explored the region before. His own daughter, Eleanor Dare, was among the settlers. She would later give birth to Virginia Dare, the first English-born child in the Americas. When the colonists reached Roanoke Island, they expected to find the abandoned fort from the previous expedition waiting for them. Instead, they found ruins, overgrown fields, and a place that felt deserted. Still, they decided to rebuild. They repaired the houses, planted crops, and created a new beginning. But soon the challenges returned. The colonists struggled with food shortages, unpredictable weather, and uneasy relationships with some of the surrounding tribes. Despite this, they worked hard to survive. But the colony faced a critical problem. They needed supplies. They needed tools, seeds, clothing, and fresh soldiers to defend themselves. They had no choice but to send someone back to England. John White, though reluctant, agreed to make the dangerous journey across the Atlantic to request help. It would be the last time he saw his family, his home, and the people he had sworn to protect. When White left Roanoke in 1587, he believed he would return within a few months. But history had other plans. England was preparing for war with Spain. The Spanish Armada threatened the nation, and every available ship was seized for military defense. White was trapped in England. Months turned into years. His desperation grew, but he could do nothing. 3 years later, in 1590, he finally secured passage back to Roanoke. With excitement and fear, he imagined reuniting with his daughter, his granddaughter, and the people who had waited for him. But when his ship reached the island, the sight that greeted him was far from joyous. The settlement was empty, silent. Houses had been dismantled rather than destroyed. There were no signs of fire, no scattered belongings, no bodies. Everything looked strangely organized, as if the colonists had left willingly. The only clue was carved into a wooden post, a single word: Croatoan. the home of their allied tribe, the Croatoan people.
John White believed the colonists had relocated peacefully. He begged his crew to sail to Croatoan Island. But storms struck. The ship lost its anchors. The crew refused to continue. They turned away, and John White was forced to return to England without ever discovering what happened to his family. His grief became a permanent shadow in his life. And so the mystery began. What happened to the Lost Colony? Did they join the Croatoan tribe? Did they move inland to a safer location? Were they attacked? Did they split into several groups? Did they survive for years? Or did disaster strike soon after White left? To answer these questions, we must understand the world surrounding Roanoke. The land was rich, but survival was not easy. The tribes who lived there had their own histories, alliances, and conflicts. The English were newcomers, entering a world they barely understood. The Croatoan people, led by Chief Manteo, had been friendly to the English. Manteo had traveled to England and served as a bridge between cultures. He even helped the first Roanoke expedition. The Croatoans lived on present-day Hatteras Island and were known for their fishing and trade. If any tribe would welcome the colonists, it would be them. But the region was also home to other tribes, including the Secatan and groups under the larger Algonquian world. Tensions between the English and these tribes had grown after violent encounters with the first colony. The colonists of 1587 inherited mistrust they didn't create. To the north lived the Powhatan Confederacy, a powerful alliance led by Chief Powhatan, one of the most influential native leaders on the East Coast. His name would later become famous through his daughter Pocahontas. At the time of the Roanoke colony, the Powhatans were expanding their territory and dealing with rival tribes. The arrival of English settlers added another layer of uncertainty. The colonists at Roanoke found themselves surrounded by potential allies, potential enemies, and potential opportunities. Their survival depended on navigating these complex relationships. But without strong leadership, without supplies, and without a clear strategy, their situation grew more fragile. As Part 1 ends here, the mystery of Roanoke is only beginning. In the next part, we explore the clues the colonists left behind, the stories reported by native tribes, and the discoveries made hundreds of years later by archaeologists. We look deeper into the world they entered and the paths they might have taken. This is not just a story of disappearance. It is a story of survival, conflict, adaptation, and the birth of legends that continue to shape American history today.
When John White returned to the silent island in 1590, he believed the single word carved into the post was not a warning, but a direction. Croatoan. It was the name of the island where the friendly Croatoan tribe lived and the home of Manteo, the man who had traveled to England with earlier explorers and pledged friendship to the English. And for White, this was the only clue that the settlers had left behind. Yet the storm that destroyed the ship's anchors prevented White from ever reaching Croatoan. Against his will, he returned to England carrying nothing but questions. And from that moment, the mystery of Roanoke only grew deeper. To understand what might have happened after the disappearance, we must look closely at the world the colonists stepped into. The land around Roanoke was home to a network of tribes, each with its own politics, relationships, and rivalries. The Croatoan tribe had long shown friendliness toward the English. They shared food, helped guide explorers, and built diplomatic ties through Manteo. The Secautan tribe, on the other hand, had a history of tension with the English due to earlier misunderstandings and confrontations. To the north lived the powerful Powhatan Confederacy, a large and organized alliance of tribes led by Chief Powhatan, the father of the well-known Pocahontas. These tribes interacted, traded, fought, and formed alliances long before Europeans arrived. The colonists entered a land already shaped by complex politics, and they were forced to navigate a world they did not fully understand. 20 years after the disappearance, a new English settlement was built in Jamestown, Virginia. This is where the story takes a surprising turn. Captain John Smith, leader of Jamestown, reported that Chief Powhatan told him something shocking. The chief claimed that a group of Europeans had survived inland, living among a tribe hostile to Powhatan. According to the chief, he later attacked that tribe and killed the Europeans living there. Whether Powhatan was telling the full truth, exaggerating, or manipulating the English is unknown, but this testimony added a deep layer of mystery. Some Jamestown settlers even reported seeing native people with gray eyes, speaking bits of English words, or using tools that resembled English craftsmanship. None of these accounts were proven, but they created the possibility that some Roanoke colonists survived, at least for a time. As modern archaeologists began studying Roanoke again, they uncovered surprising evidence buried under the sand and soil. On Hatteras Island, where the Croatoan tribe lived, excavations revealed European items from the correct time period. Iron tools, glass objects, metal scraps, and even a signet ring with a lion emblem, possibly belonging to an Englishman, were found at native sites. Some of these items were reshaped and repurposed in native style, suggesting long-term contact. If the colonists were killed immediately, these objects would not likely exist in the forms they do today. Instead, they look like the belongings of people who integrated into native communities and lived there long enough for their items to be modified and reused. In the early 2000s, one of the most extraordinary discoveries came from John White's original map. For more than 400 years, the map had a small patch glued over one section. When researchers examined it under modern lighting, they found a hidden symbol beneath the patch. It appeared to mark the location of a fort roughly 40 miles inland, matching White's earlier statement that the colonists had a backup plan to relocate if danger came. Archaeologists later found fragments of European pottery at this inland site, matching the timeline of the Roanoke settlers. This location became known as Site X. It does not solve the mystery, but it shows that at least some colonists may have moved inland exactly as the message instructed. Among historians, the most widely accepted modern explanation is the idea that the colonists joined the Croatoan tribe. This theory fits many pieces of evidence. The settlers had friendly relations with the Croatoan people. The word Croatoan appears as a clear message, not a distress signal. The village was dismantled carefully, not destroyed. Tools were taken, houses removed, and supplies carried away. These are signs of an organized move, not a violent ending. The mixed artifacts found on Hatteras Island, including English tools modified by native techniques, suggest cultural blending. There are also native oral histories that speak of ancestors with English features or stories of white newcomers joining their communities. If this theory is correct, the Lost Colony did not vanish, it adapted. The colonists may have married into native families, raised children there, and slowly became part of the local tribes. Another theory, darker in tone, connects the colonists with Powhatan's claim of violence. According to that account, a group of Europeans lived inland, but was wiped out during tribal conflict. However, archaeologists have not found conclusive evidence supporting Powhatan's story. Some believe Powhatan had political motives to impress or intimidate the English in Jamestown. Others think he told only a partial truth. Without physical evidence, the theory remains uncertain. Some historians believe that the colony simply collapsed from starvation. This idea is supported by tree ring data, showing that the years between 1587 and 1589 were marked by the worst drought in 800 years. Food sources would have been dangerously scarce. Farms would fail, fish would be limited, and hunting would become nearly impossible. The colonists had limited farming knowledge and depended heavily on native support. If that support weakened, they could easily have faced starvation. But this does not explain why the settlement was deliberately taken apart, nor the message carved into the post. A simple collapse does not match the organized relocation signs. Over the centuries, the absence of answers has produced countless legends. Some indigenous folklore tells stories of villages disappearing overnight due to curses or spiritual beings. Later, supernatural theories emerged in popular culture, including ideas about aliens or strange lights. These stories lack historical support, but reflect how deeply the mystery captured the imagination of Americans. In the 1930s, a new piece of evidence appeared, known as the Dare Stones. The first stone was claimed to be written by Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter. It described deaths, suffering, and the final moments of the colony. Several more stones appeared afterward, but most were revealed to be hoaxes. Historians still debate whether the first stone might be authentic, but the rest were almost certainly fabricated to attract attention. The Dare stones remain controversial and unreliable as evidence. In recent years, scientists have begun searching for answers in DNA. Some tribes in North Carolina, including the Lumbee, have oral histories describing ancestors with English surnames, lighter eyes, or physical traits uncommon among surrounding tribes. Genetic evidence is not conclusive, but it does suggest the possibility of intermarriage and cultural blending. Instead of disappearing, the colonists may have lived on through their descendants. As researchers continue to investigate, a growing number of historians believe that we may have been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of asking where the colonists went, we should be asking who they became. The signs point toward an orderly migration, splitting into groups that traveled inland, southward, and toward Croatoan. They carried tools, dismantled their homes, left a clear message, and followed a plan they had discussed before John White left. The people of Roanoke did not disappear in a moment of tragedy. They adapted to a new world, reshaped their identity, and blended into indigenous nations whose descendants may still live today. The mystery of Roanoke remains unsolved, but the clues paint a picture of survival, migration, and transformation rather than sudden disappearance. And the deeper we explore the evidence, the more we realize that the truth may have been hidden in plain sight for more than 400 years. The mystery of the Lost Colony deepens when we follow the trail of the settlers after the message carved into the wooden post. The word Croatoan was not just a clue, it was a promise of intention. The settlers clearly planned to relocate and hoped someone would follow their trail. But their journey was not as simple as walking from Roanoke to another shore. Their survival depended on alliances, food sources, tribal politics, and the harsh reality of the Carolina wilderness. To understand what happened next, we must retrace their final possible movements, step by step, through the land that shaped their fate. When the settlers left Roanoke, they likely traveled south toward Hatteras Island, a place known for friendlier relations and safer hunting grounds. They knew the Croatoan people, trusted them, and had navigated those waters before. This was not a blind escape. It was a strategic retreat. The families, including women and children, must have traveled slowly, carrying tools, personal items, weapons, and the essentials needed to rebuild life somewhere else. Their relocation suggests a community that still had hope, not one that died in panic. But their trail becomes complicated when we introduce another possibility. Some evidence suggests that while a group headed to Croatoan, others may have traveled inland toward a hidden location marked on John White's map. Many years later, researchers discovered a concealed symbol beneath a patch on the map, marking what appears to be a small fort or settlement site about 40 miles from Roanoke. This has become known as Site X. It raises a powerful question. Did the settlers split into more than one group? If so, This would explain why no single place holds the entire story. Archaeological discoveries at Site X include fragments of English pottery dating to the correct era. Some pieces appear to have belonged to middle-class English households, consistent with Roanoke families. These scattered clues do not tell a complete story, but they whisper the possibility that a small group of settlers established a second camp inland. If they stayed there long enough, they would have interacted with nearby tribes. Some tribes might have welcomed them, others might have seen them as intruders. Meanwhile, on Hatteras Island, evidence strongly indicates English presence long after the colony disappeared. Glass beads, a signet ring, the metal tip of a sword, and redesigned English objects reshaped into tools used by native people all point to cultural blending. None of these items appear to have been hurriedly dropped or left behind in chaos. They were used, repurposed, and incorporated into native life. This suggests a peaceful integration, not a massacre. But while some settlers may have survived peacefully, their long-term fate becomes uncertain when we consider the political tensions among the tribes. The Powhatan Confederacy, one of the most powerful native groups in the region, may have seen the settlers as a threat. Years after the disappearance, Chief Powhatan told English leaders in Jamestown that he had destroyed a group of Europeans who lived inland. The truth behind this claim remains unclear. Powhatan may have exaggerated the story for leverage in negotiations, or he may have told the truth about a conflict involving a splinter group of the Roanoke settlers. Without physical remains, we cannot fully confirm or deny his words. The drought records add another layer to this already complex story. Tree ring analysis shows that during the exact years the colony existed, the region experienced one of the most severe droughts in centuries. Food became scarce, fresh water sources dried up, and tensions among tribes likely increased as resources grew limited. The settlers, inexperienced in this climate, would have struggled to farm. Their dependence on native alliances for food and survival would have intensified. If any alliance broke down even slightly, the settlers might have faced starvation or displacement. Despite these hardships, one thing is clear. If the settlers died suddenly or violently, their belongings and bodies would have been found. But no mass graves, no burned structures, and no clear signs of battle were discovered. The empty settlement shows signs of controlled, careful disassembly. Houses seemed dismantled, not destroyed. Items that were too heavy to carry were left behind in an orderly fashion. This indicates an organized and intentional migration, not a desperate collapse. The more we examine the clues, the more the story shifts from disappearance to transformation. A growing number of historians believe that the settlers did not vanish. They adapted. They joined tribes, adopted local ways of life, raised children within native communities, learned new languages, and over time, their English identity blended into the broader culture around them. Evidence from the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina includes oral histories describing ancestors with European features, English surnames, and unexpected traits like gray or blue eyes appearing in later generations. These stories hint that bloodlines may have survived, even if the colony itself did not. Still, mysteries remain. Jamestown settlers reported encounters with natives who spoke bits of English or used English tools in ways no one could explain. Explorers saw villages with houses shaped like English cottages. Others reported native warriors carrying iron weapons that could only have come from Europeans. These stories, scattered and inconsistent, form a mosaic of possibilities that point back to Roanoke. What likely happened is not one single event, but a sequence of choices. Some settlers may have reached Croatoan and lived there peacefully. Others may have journeyed towards Site X and integrated into tribes inland. A few may have been captured or killed during conflicts. Over years, identities blurred, cultures mixed, and the original colony dissolved into multiple paths.
The disappearance was not a moment, it was a process. The more we look, the more the lost colony becomes a story not of tragedy, but of resilience. These settlers faced hunger, storms, political dangers, and uncertainty. But instead of giving up, they adapted to survive in the only ways available to them. Their legacy remains hidden not in ruins, but in memories, in DNA, in scattered artifacts, and in the stories passed down through generations of native families. The mystery of Roanoke is compelling because it defies simple explanation. It stretches across geography, cultures, and centuries. And yet, every clue, every artifact, and every oral tradition points towards one powerful truth. The colonists did not vanish into thin air. They changed, they merged, they evolved. And in doing so, they became part of the land far more deeply than anyone who later searched for them. If we follow these clues, we begin to see the lost colony not as a disappearance, but as one of the earliest and most complex stories of cultural blending in American history.
The winter of 1588 was one of the darkest seasons in England's recent memory. News of the lost colony spread slowly across London streets, and curiosity grew into a haunting obsession. Scholars debated the fate of the colonists. Sailors whispered stories of storms, famine, and strange lights near the Carolina coast. Politicians criticized the decision to settle on Roanoke in the first place. But underneath all the conversations, one question remained, growing louder each year. What truly happened to the men, women, and children left behind on the island? People who knew John White personally said he was never the same again. His eyes carried the weight of unanswered questions. His hands shook whenever he touched the maps he once drew with pride. He had imagined Roanoke as a thriving English foothold in the New World. Instead, it had become a silent mystery that followed him until his death. Even in his final days, he told friends that he believed the colonists were alive, living with friendly tribes somewhere inland. But belief is not proof, and the absence of proof is what kept the mystery alive for future generations. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the land itself continued evolving. Forests grew thicker, rivers shifted their courses. Entire villages of native tribes relocated due to drought, conflict, and survival. If the colonists moved inland, their traces would have scattered with the natural changes of time. Wooden structures would rot, clothing would decay, graves would disappear into the soil. Only a handful of durable objects, like iron tools or pottery, could survive the centuries, but even those would be difficult to distinguish from items acquired through trade or conflict. During the early 1600s, English settlers at Jamestown began hearing strange stories from the Powhatan world. Some claimed that a tribe living near the Chesapeake Bay region had members with gray eyes or European-like features. Others described villages where people used iron tools or copper kettles that the English had never traded with them. Every story deepened the suspicion that the missing Roanoke colonists were not dead, but absorbed into native societies. The idea was both comforting and frustrating. If the colonists survived by joining tribes, why did no one return to England? Why did no clear message ever reach John White? Perhaps years of travel, illness, or war had taken their lives before the Jamestown colony ever took root. Or perhaps they simply chose not to return, having built a new identity in a world far different from what they left behind. In 1608, a Jamestown boy named Thomas Savage lived among the Powhatans as part of a cultural exchange. During his time with the tribe, he heard rumors about a group of people who resembled the English. They lived beyond the territory the Powhatans controlled and were said to be protected by another nation. The Powhatans implied that this group was armed and lived in fortified structures. Some believed this referred to the Roanoke colonists, who might have fled inland and formed a settlement with native allies.
But no English expedition ever managed to verify this rumor, mostly due to danger, lack of supplies, and constant conflict with surrounding tribes. As the decades passed, the mystery persisted in the background of America's early colonial history. Explorers, missionaries, and traders encountered native groups with unusual customs that sparked speculation. Some tribes practiced weaving styles similar to English methods. Others used metal items repurposed in ways that suggested long familiarity. There were even reports of English words spoken in remote communities far from the coast. But each time investigators tried to follow a lead, it dissolved into uncertain memory, unclear translation, or local legend. Centuries later, archaeologists began uncovering more concrete clues. On Hatteras Island, small artifacts emerged from the soil, parts of swords, pieces of writing slates, broken pottery decorated in English styles, and tools that had clearly been reshaped by native craftsmanship. These discoveries painted a picture of long-term contact, perhaps even coexistence, between colonists and the Croatoan tribe. The items were not scattered randomly, they appeared in domestic areas, suggesting that English objects were used in everyday life. The simplest explanation was that at least some of the Roanoke colonists survived and lived with the Croatoan people long enough to integrate into their daily routines. Another startling discovery came from inland North Carolina, where archaeologists found fragments of European pottery far from the coast. These pieces were found near settlements of tribes believed to have been friendly to the early English. If the Roanoke colonists split into multiple groups, it is possible that one group went to Croatoan Island while another traveled inland towards safer territory marked on John White's map. The inland theory grew stronger when researchers discovered hidden markings on one of White's old maps indicating a possible fort site. This suggested the colonists might have planned or attempted to move inland from the very beginning if danger ever arose. But despite these findings, ambiguity remains. The artifacts prove contact, but they do not prove identity. A tool used by a native villager could have been taken from a colonial home, received through trade, or collected from a deserted site. The absence of written records from the colonists themselves leaves every interpretation open to debate. But the consistency of clues across locations supports a broader truth. The colonists did not disappear in an instant. They moved, interacted, adapted, and likely survived far longer than historians once believed. Modern historians increasingly argue that the mystery's solution does not lie in dramatic endings, mass disappearance, or supernatural events. Instead, the truth may be found in understanding assimilation. The world of the late 1500s along the Carolina coast was one of shifting alliances, shared survival strategies, and blended cultures. Sickness, climate disasters, and conflict forced people to adapt quickly. If a group of 100 English settlers suddenly found themselves without supplies, leadership, or rescue, joining a native nation might have been the only path to survival. Over time, English customs would fade, replaced by native ways. Children born into these blended communities would identify with their tribe rather than a distant homeland they had never seen. By the early 1700s, several native groups in North Carolina displayed features, names, and traditions that suggested partial European ancestry. Tribal stories spoke of ancestors who came from the island of the Pale People, or from the settlement that vanished. Even today, some families in the region carry surnames linked to Roanoke colonists. Although genetic evidence is not definitive, it aligns with the theory that the colonists merged into local tribes over generations. The mystery of Roanoke may never have a single dramatic solution, because the true ending may have been a quiet, gradual blending into a new world. Instead of a colony that died, it may have transformed. Instead of a tragedy, it may have been a survival story. The colonists, faced with impossible choices, might have done what humans have always done: adapt,
seek community, and continue life in the only way available to them. The story of Roanoke is not just a historical puzzle, it is a reflection of early American history, where cultures met, clashed, and often merged in ways that shaped the identity of entire regions. The Lost Colony may not be lost at all. Its legacy lives on in the land, in scattered artifacts, in oral histories, and possibly in the descendants who still walk the Carolina coast centuries later.
The search for the lost colony enters its most mysterious phase when we follow the path of the settlers into the depths of the Carolina interior. As the years passed after their disappearance, strange reports began to surface from explorers, traders, and native communities, stories that suggested the colonists did not simply vanish, but scattered into multiple directions, leaving behind a trail of whispers and clues that remained buried for centuries. One of the earliest clues came from native oral history that mentioned small groups of Europeans who appeared in remote tribal territories long after the Roanoke settlement was abandoned. Some of these stories described pale-skinned people who had learned to farm using native techniques, lived in tribal dwellings, and spoke broken Algonquin mixed with English. Others mentioned fair-haired children living among tribes, using copper and iron tools that were foreign to the region. These accounts are impossible to verify fully, but they point toward a larger truth. The colonists may have fragmented into more than one group. As new English settlers continued to arrive on the coast throughout the early 1600s, they reported encounters with natives who claimed to have seen Englishmen walking inland trails, wearing animal skins and carrying wooden bows instead of guns. Some of these natives used English words, simple ones such as home, food, or child, suggesting second-hand exposure. These are not things that appear by accident. They hint at deep cultural blending, perhaps lasting several generations. There were also reports from traders who ventured deep into the Carolina swamps, where they claimed to see European-style houses made of timber. Although these observations were rare and poorly documented, they fueled the idea that a group of Roanoke survivors had built a new life somewhere far from the coast, away from conflict, drought, and starvation. The colonists had carpenters, farmers, and trained craftsmen. If they found a safe place, it was entirely possible for them to build new structures and form a small, hidden English native community. This possibility grows stronger when considering the cruel drought conditions the settlers faced. Scientific tree ring analysis reveals that the years surrounding their disappearance experienced one of the worst droughts in the region's history. Rivers shrank, crops failed, and wild game migrated. Under such conditions, staying near the coast would have been nearly impossible. Moving inland toward larger rivers in fertile soil would have been a logical survival strategy. The inscription left behind at the abandoned colony was not a desperate cry, it was a clue indicating a planned relocation. The geography of the region also played a critical role. The dense forests, twisting rivers, and harsh wetlands of North Carolina could easily hide entire groups of people for decades. Even today, many areas remain remote and unexplored. In the late 1500s, these lands were even more isolated. If the colonists merged with native communities, there would be almost no visible trace to uncover centuries later. Clothing decays, wood rots, and unmarked graves blend into the wilderness. What survives are only fragments, potsherds, metal tools, reshaped arrowheads, and these fragments match the right era. But the most compelling evidence comes from the discovery of European artifacts at inland sites, places where no English settlements were officially established. Pottery shards, metal fragments, and glass beads matching Roanoke-era materials indicate that some colonists traveled far from the coast. Although these discoveries are small in number, they hint at a broader movement of the settlers into different native regions. Explorers in the early 1600s also documented strange encounters with natives who described a group of people without a village, wandering and seeking refuge. These accounts match what a scattered, starving colony might look like. Families who split up, moving from one tribal territory to another, hoping to find safety. Not all tribes were friendly. Some regions were extremely dangerous due to ongoing intertribal wars. It is possible that some Roanoke survivors were taken in, some were killed, and others continued wandering. The lack of bones or bodies is not surprising. Native tribes often adopted outsiders, and tragic deaths were often buried according to tribal customs, leaving behind no European markers. There were also rumors that some Roanoke men were forced into servitude by hostile tribes and later seen working in native agricultural fields. Although this may never be proven, it reflects the turbulent political climate of the region during that era. Between disease, famine, and tribal rivalry, life was extremely fragile. A few colonists may have survived, but not intact as a single community. Other groups may have tried to reach the hidden fort location marked beneath John White's secret map. This location sits along a major river system that would have offered fresh water, fertile soil, and natural protection. Artifacts found there match English pottery from the exact period of Roanoke's disappearance. These findings suggest that at least one group of survivors may have reached this planned safe site and stayed for some time. Whether they thrived or eventually dispersed remains a mystery. Yet another possibility is that some colonists attempted to make their way toward modern-day Virginia, hoping to reach more powerful tribal alliances with better access to food and protection. If even a small number reached tribes under the Powhatan sphere, their fate might have been either adoption or conflict. Powhatan oral tradition mentions Europeans living with rival tribes, and in some versions of the story, these settlers met violent ends. This could explain why no large group of Roanoke survivors was ever encountered by the Jamestown colonists. In addition to all these possibilities, environmental factors played a major role. The Outer Banks region is known for hurricanes, massive floods, and shifting sands. Over time, entire shorelines have moved, burying evidence underwater. If the settlers left items, temporary shelters, or small boats behind, they might now be under several meters of sand or submerged beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Archaeologists believe that a large portion of Roanoke Island's coastline from the 1500s is now underwater due to erosion and rising sea levels, hiding crucial evidence forever. The most fascinating part of the story is that even though the Roanoke colony is called Lost, in many ways it was never lost at all. The people lived, experienced hardship, sought refuge, and likely integrated into multiple indigenous societies. Their bloodlines may still exist today, invisible in records but alive in communities with mixed ancestry. Instead of disappearing suddenly, the colony may have slowly dissolved into a new culture, transforming over time into something unrecognizable to English historians. The silence at the abandoned settlement was not the end, but the beginning of a long, complex journey of survival. The evidence suggests they did not fail, they adapted. They found allies, they built new lives, and they became part of a land that was far older and richer than they ever understood. Their story is not of disappearance, but of resilience, transformation, and the deep blending of two civilizations. If this interpretation is correct, then the final truth of Roanoke is not buried under ruins or hidden in a single location. It lives in the intertwined histories of native tribes, in the rare artifacts scattered across the Carolinas, and in the legends passed down through generations. The colony's legacy may not lie in stones or structures, but in the people who carried fragments of English identity into a new world and reshaped it entirely. Their footprints did not vanish. They simply walked into another world, leaving history behind to wonder where they went.
1600s, 1700s, 1800s. Centuries passed, and the lost colony of Roanoke continued to capture imaginations. Historians, explorers, and writers attempted to piece together what might have happened, using a mix of oral histories, artifacts, and old reports. One prevailing theory is that the colonists merged with local tribes. Croatoan Island and the surrounding areas were friendly to the English settlers. Many native oral traditions tell stories of pale-skinned people living among them. Artifacts, such as European tools and pottery, have been found in native sites, suggesting that integration was possible. Children of these unions may have carried the English legacy, even if their names and customs eventually disappeared. Another theory suggests that colonists tried to migrate inland to escape danger. White's map contained a hidden fort marking, which some modern archaeologists refer to as Site X. Excavations at this location have uncovered artifacts consistent with late 16th century European settlers. This supports the idea that a portion of the colony attempted a planned, organized relocation, possibly with the Croatoan tribe's guidance or other native allies. Some believe that a tragic end befell the colony through violence or disease. Reports from Jamestown, decades later, mention sightings of European-looking individuals living among tribes, sometimes being killed during conflicts. Tree ring analysis shows that 1587 to 1589 experienced severe drought, which could have exacerbated starvation and illness. While evidence is circumstantial, these factors indicate the colony may have split, with some dying from natural hardships. The Dare stones, discovered in the 1930s, add another layer to the mystery. Carved messages allegedly from Eleanor Dare describe deaths and movements of the colonists. While most stones are considered hoaxes, the first stone's authenticity remains debated. If genuine, it provides direct insight into the colony's fate, detailing who survived, who perished, and their potential relocation paths. Modern scientific methods have introduced genetics as a tool to trace the lost colony. Studies have focused on the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina, whose oral histories mention ancestors with European features. While conclusive genetic evidence has not yet been found, these studies reinforce the theory that colonists assimilated into local tribes, leaving a living legacy. The Roanoke mystery continues to inspire literature, documentaries, and pop culture. From Mark Twain's 19th-century writings to 21st-century films, the story has been retold and imagined in countless ways. The fascination lies not only in the disappearance itself, but also in the human stories. Families striving to survive in a foreign land, facing unknown dangers, and leaving whispers for future generations to decode. Today, archaeologists and historians are still actively exploring sites connected to Roanoke. Ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, and underwater archaeology are uncovering new clues each year. Every discovery, whether a fragment of pottery, a metal tool, or a faint inscription, brings scholars closer to understanding the colony's final chapter. Despite centuries of research, Roanoke's ultimate fate remains unsolved. The evidence points toward a combination of survival, migration, and assimilation rather than a single catastrophic event. Whether integrated with the Croatoan tribe, scattered inland, or lost to the elements, the colonists left a legacy embedded in the land, the cultures, and the imagination of America. The Lost Colony teaches enduring lessons about resilience, cultural exchange, and the limits of historical knowledge. It reminds us that even in failure or disappearance, human stories endure, reshaping narratives across generations. The mystery persists, not because of absence, but because the story itself is more complex than any simple conclusion could capture. The legend of Roanoke, the first English settlement in America to vanish, continues to challenge historians and captivate the public. While definitive answers may never come, each clue, from artifacts to oral histories, contributes to a richer understanding of early colonial life, native interactions, and the harsh realities of survival on the edge of an unknown world. Roanoke remains a symbol of curiosity, ambition, and the fragility of human endeavors. Its story, though incomplete,
invites us to look beyond disappearance and focus on the human will to adapt, endure, and merge with new worlds, leaving traces for those willing to search for centuries. Even after more than 400 years, the story of Roanoke inspires questions, research, and imagination. The lost colony may never fully reveal its secrets, but its spirit lives on in every search, every artifact unearthed, and every tale of courage told about those who dared to cross the ocean in search of a new life.